I was a fresh set of eyes, and I had the luxury of saying, well, maybe technology can help, and it did help. When that tape I talked about, the FBI was able to say that the tape found with Barbara's body was an exact duplicate in filament fibers and construction as the tape that was found in his apartment, and he had a connection to the factory where it was made and things like that. So I mean, that was strong evidence, strong physical evidence. But yeah, it was a rough case. And, I mean, from the time it was reopened till the time we got a conviction was 15 years.
Hey everybody, how you doing? Welcome back to another Nobody with me, your number one nobody, Travis Myers. Today I got a great conversation with you with a good friend of mine named Chris McMullin. Chris has done over 30 years in law enforcement in a couple of different departments, and we're going to let him tell you about that. He's a good guy. He's done some tremendous work with cold cases. And in fact, wrote a book called 3 Decades Cold, all right, about some of the cases that he worked on. He's also the host of the Philly Homicide program, which you can find on the Oxygen Network. No more nonsense from me. Let's get with Chris. Hey, Chris, how you doing?
Travis, how are you?
All right, we're together again. I like it. Good. All right, so I already gave my introduction to you, to all of our listeners. So let's hop right into it, man. You have worked, well, you currently work you're a lieutenant in the Bucks County Sheriff's Department, correct?
Yes.
But you worked for 3 different departments before that. Do I got that right?
Yes, I did. I started out back in 1989. I was 19 years old. I became a dispatcher for the North Wildwood Police Department in New Jersey. And then the following year, I went to the police academy down there, and I was what they call a class 2, a seasonal officer. I was one of those cops on the boardwalk.
Yeah, the summertime cops. I remember them well. We used to spend plenty of summers down there in Wildwood Crest and head up north to the boardwalk.
That was my launching pad down there, and I had a lot of good times down there. My grandmother had a home down there, right next to the North Wildwood Police. So from the time I can remember, like I was 4 years old, I'd be sitting on the patio, and I could look over the fence, and I could see that was where the cops parked their cars. And I thought they were the neatest things in the world. Sometimes they would say hello to me. There was a time I was riding my bike, and I fell off my bike, and a couple officers stopped and helped me up. And then the door was open, and I could see the radio, and they were letting me see the inside of the car. And I just, so back then, I think the seed was planted. That's what I wanted to do.
That's what bit you right then. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, good. You had somebody to look up to, and you did. Cool.
Yeah, it was nice. And then after that season working on the boardwalk, that was 1990, and I think it was late September of 90. I was hired by the Philadelphia Police Department, and I entered the police academy, and class 294, and worked for Philadelphia for just about 2 years. After I graduated, I worked in the 9th District, which was at the time located at 20th and Callowhill in Center City, Philly, and it was a good district to work in. I was a patrol officer there, and then in 92, I had the opportunity to go to the Bensalem Police Department, which is in neighboring Bucks County. Bensalem borders Philadelphia on the northeast side.
Mm-hmm.
And went to Bensalem, and I stayed there for 30 years.
30 years you were there. All right. How big a municipality is Bensalem?
Pardon me?
How large of a municipality is that? I'm not familiar with it.
It's a pretty big size. It's 21 square miles. So it's
large.
It's a nice sized municipality. Yeah, it's big.
Yeah. And of course, being right next door, so that would be, just to kind of make it more similar for me, it would be sort of like working, we worked in the Bronx. It'd be like working a separate borough almost of Philadelphia because it's attached.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what I thought.
So yeah, on Philadelphia's northeast border, and just, half hour north of us was Trenton. And then it's right on the Delaware River. So New Jersey, you can see New Jersey. So, it's located in a prime spot. I mean, you got the I-95 running through it, the Pennsylvania Turnpike.
Oh, I know.
Right.
I've been to Philly many, many times.
Yeah,
So,
it's a very busy area.
in fact, Philly, sadly, with all of its problems, and it seems like it's got more problems going on now, has always been one of my favorite cities, to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just always liked it. There was something kind of old-fashioned and very neighborhoody about it, And I would go, I think I had told you, I had friends that lived down in South Philly, and we would go and visit all the time. And it was just something about it that, and I'm certainly not putting Philly down when I say that, but it just reminded me of what I thought New York City would have been 30 years prior. So back in the 70s and 80s, I kind of felt like it was New York City from the 50s, if that made sense to you.
Yeah, no, I get it.
And I always enjoyed my trips down there.
Yeah, I had a good friend. He lives in Virginia now, but we went to the academy together, and he was from South Philly. Tony was his name, and I used to go down there a lot with him, and I love that neighborhood. I grew up in Mayfair, which was in the Northeast, which I still miss the old neighborhood.
Yeah. But that's like me. I'm out of New York City now. I live about an hour north, and there's so many things that, well, it's kind of like the old double-edged sword. So many things that I miss desperately, but sadly, my city is gone. My neighborhood, the way how I grew up, the way we grew up, the closeness, the camaraderie, the neighborhood itself just doesn't exist anymore. And that I find very depressing. So
yeah, I had a similar experience to that after my grandmother passed away, and I held on to her house for a while, and I was taking my time preparing it to sell it and whatnot. And I was down, and this was in 2008. And there were things happening down there that I realized the same thing. I'm like, this is not the same neighborhood I grew up in. I mean, geographically, that's it. But as far as what was going on, different story.
Things change. Things change. Now, so let me see. You did 30 years there. Now you're still working. You're still on the job as a sheriff.
I am. Yeah, I'll be out 3 years
world,
there.
Right?
Pardon me?
Much different world?
It is a much different world. I mean, it's still law enforcement, but it is a different world. And there's a big difference in my experience between the police department and the sheriff's office. And the sheriff's office has a lot of moving parts to it.
Right.
But I do enjoy it. And in all honesty, I like the hours for a change,
Right.
I'm not working around the clock. I have weekends off. Actually, it's been positive for me because took me a while, but I actually can sleep through the night now, and things like that. So some positive lifestyle changes, which are much appreciated at this point.
Well, with 30, how many years total are you now? 30 what?
32 as a police officer.
32. So with 32 years on the job, I mean, we could sit here and talk. We could tell stories to each other for hours. Mm-hmm. But the story I want to hear about is one of the ones that's in your book here. All right. 3 Decades Cold by you, sir, Chris McMullin and Maria Viola Jefferson. All right. And in this one here, you talk about some cold cases that you did once you got to Ben Salem and you became a detective. And I certainly don't want to give the book away, but there was one in particular that I found, I guess, very interesting because of the personal connection, but I'm not going to tell a story you are, which is that of Barbara Rowan. Am I saying that correct?
Barbara Rowan.
Yeah.
That's correct. Yeah, that case, I referred to that case, that was the big one for me. I first became, as an adult, aware of that case. It was around 2002. And I was a detective at that point, and I had to have surgery on my knee. And at that point, I was in a cast, but I was, a walking cast, and I was on crutches, and they allowed me to come back to work on light duty, on desk duty. I couldn't drive a car. I couldn't go out to the field and do any cases, but, I could type and answer the phone.
Yeah, I've been there many times, yeah.
Yeah. And so, I was at work one evening, and I don't know, I guess my supervisor at the time, she said, "Are you looking for something good to do?" I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Why don't you take a look at the Rowan case?" And I said, what's the Rowan case? I'm unaware of it. And she said, it happened back in 1984. It was a 14-year-old girl who was murdered in the Trevo section of Ben Salem. And it had never been solved. And she piqued my interest with that. And of course, it because it was an old case, it wasn't in the current computer system that we were using at the time. So we had to go back in evidence room and dust off some boxes and pull out some 3-ring binders and things like that. And I was very taken by the case, and I started reading it immediately. I took it home with me that night. I read it cover to cover multiple times, and I thought to myself, this is a solvable case. And the case really grabbed me, for lack of a better term. So that, the following day in work, I went in, I said, I would like to be assigned to this case. And I said, I believe it is solvable. And I was told, well, you can work on it as long as you don't fall behind on your current cases.
Yes.
Fair enough. So that was in 2002. So I spent maybe the next year just really educating myself on the case and finding out, as far as, some of the prime suspects and people that were involved, where were they at? Were they still alive? Things like that. And eventually I had teamed up with my buddy Mike Mosniak, who at the time was a detective with the Bucks County DA's office. And he actually shared the same passion for the case that I did. He felt it was solvable. And, Ben Salem is a busy town. It's busier now than it was back then. But I just, I didn't think we were busy enough where we should have an unsolved homicide involving a child. And I felt that it was worthy of taking another look at. Mm-hmm. And so over the next several years, Mike and I, we did a lot of, just re-interviewing people and taking evidence and resubmitting it, hoping that newer technology could do something that was not available back in 84.
Well, it's got to be, and not to interrupt you, was this your first ever cold case?
Yes.
See, now, I myself have never worked a cold case, okay? And I can't imagine, now, how you can step into something so old, because now there is no trail. There's nothing, I shouldn't say there's no trail, but there's nothing new, nothing fresh. It's like what is that show that they have on the First 48? We all know everything is juicy right in the beginning. Everybody remembers everything right in the beginning. The fingerprints, well, we had no DNA back in the day, but things like that, it's so much of it's gone now.
Yeah, there was no DNA evidence in this case at all.
Where do you, as again, here you are, a young detective with a brand new case that's what, 20 years old?
I think it was 16 years old when I picked it up. At the time, I was 32 years old. I actually even spent some time with the original investigators on it, who had retired. Mm-hmm. But I would meet them for lunch and ask them to tell me what their take on it was. And there was 2 guys that were the primary investigators back when it happened, and that case haunted both of them. They, sure. I remember them telling me, that was the one case that when I retired, that just I wish we had solved. And they were very supportive of us reopening it, and they did help when the time came. All you have is the photos that were taken. Mm-hmm. That's all you have to work with is what they had. And I'm not criticizing anybody, but back then they were using film, and they didn't.
Yes.
Whereas nowadays, right before I retired, we had Axon, where we could use our department issued cell phone. I could take 300 photos and have them uploaded into evidence like that, where these guys were using 110 film, and they were taking pictures, and they had to take so I would have taken much more photographs.
Well, you and I both remember what it was like when we used to print people with ink and paper. Yeah. And then for us, I don't know how it worked in Philly or where you are, but then we would send that all the way down to the processing lab, and it would take weeks and weeks and weeks to come back. And you'd have to go down there physically and ask, can I have these back? Because there was no computer for them to send them to you on, you know?
Yeah, it was just, that was the time. It was a different time. Yeah, so it was a lot. And I think it was in '04. One of the key pieces of evidence in that case was Barbara's body was bound with tape, and it was like a commercial grade duct tape. It wasn't a brand that one could go buy in a hardware store on retail. It was made commercially for commercial products. And there were rolls of tape similar to the tape that was found with her that were found at the prime suspect's residence back in '84, but they were never able to link to say it was the same tape. And, I was hoping that maybe with current technology that was an option. So we actually took the tape down to Quantico back in '04. But
Quantico for our listeners is the FBI headquarters.
Right. But, they, and I'm sure they still do, back then, they had a big backlog. So, we didn't get, I think it was springtime in '04, we took it down. I remember actually getting a report back from them on it. It was December of 2010.
Wow.
But you know what? They delivered.
Years.
So, yeah. But, so, Mike and I, we had interviewed a lot of people. We had interviewed one of the prime suspects in prison, and felt like it was very clear he had been holding out in the past and was holding out again, but then he shut down on us. But our current district attorney in Bucks County, her name is Jennifer Shorn. At the time, she wasn't the DA, but she was, a DA up there that I worked with a lot. And she was one of my go-to people, very, very good prosecutor. And I had been working on another big case with her. And during that time, I had made a copy of the Rowan files, and we were at lunch and I handed it to her. I said, you have to take a look at this case. I said, I think this case is solvable, and I think it's a good case for grand jury. And so she took it. It was about 2 years later that when the stars aligned to actually get something into grand jury. And, I had the report back in 2010, but we didn't actually get that case into grand jury until the spring of 2015.
Wow.
And that's not to say other things weren't being done. I mean, we were doing a lot. We had tracked down and spoken with a lot of people. And some people, the stories were the same, and some people, they had changed over time. But the real key was getting that case into grand jury and getting a guy named Robert Sanders to finally admit that he was there the night that Barbara was killed, and that he helped George Shaw hide her body. And then once we finally got him to come clean, that's when things started to happen. And Shaw was living in Florida at the time. And we actually went to Florida and arrested him with the help of the Seminole County Sheriff's Office, who were great. They were great. And then we had him brought back to PA. And with all the pre-trial issues and things like that, it wasn't until 2017 that we actually had a trial, and he was convicted.
And now what, again, because we didn't get into it in the beginning here, what exactly did he do, if you can walk us through the crime?
Yeah. So, I apologize. Should have got ahead of myself. So Barbara Rowan was 14 years old. She lived about 3 or 4 doors down from him. He had only recently moved into the neighborhood. He and his wife, and he had a small daughter who was about 3 years old. And from what everybody has told me, Barbara was a shy kid, and she had a hard time with her own peers. She liked to play with children that were younger than her, or she also at times would gravitate towards adults. Yes. And anyway, she used to spend a lot of time with Shaw's daughter. Barbara used to say that she was babysitting her, but her parents always said that they wouldn't allow their daughter to babysit because they didn't think she was responsible enough. But nevertheless, she was spending time with the little girl. And on one particular day, in August, I believe it was August 3rd, 1984. Back then, I don't know how it was when you grew up, but when we were kids, when we went out, your curfew was when the street lights came on.
Yep, exactly
Yep.
the same.
And Barbara didn't make it home. And her parents had reported her missing in the early evening, and the area was searched, but they never found her. And it was not for 13 days later, on August 16th, 1984, about a quarter mile away from her house in a wooded area off a road, a guy who was walking his dog found human remains that ultimately were identified as Barbara's. At that point, they were skeletal. It was August, which told me that she was deceased on the 3rd. But ultimately, George Shaw was developed as the suspect, but the case against him was circumstantial, and it was just the district attorney at the time didn't believe there was enough evidence to file charges on him, so the case went cold. But she was, seen, in his presence earlier that day on the 3rd. But unfortunately, they weren't able to make the case at the time.
So now on your end, what was it? It sounds like this Sanders fella was the key to unlocking this case, right? Yeah. What was it that brought you to him to say, yes, this is the guy?
So he had he was an associate of Shaw's, and they both had a drug habit. But there were times
the almighty drugs that solve so many cases. So many things come down to the drugs.
Yeah. Over the years, both Sanders, and he had an older brother, Bobby Sanders, and his older brother was Billy, I believe. From time to time, they would, tell people that they knew that Shaw had killed the little girl. But then when they were pressed on it, they would back off. But when I met with a guy named Dave Rowland, who was one of the original detectives, Dave said to me, he said, Bobby Sanders is the key to that case. He knows everything that happened, and he's not saying anything out of fear of obviously getting in trouble, and also probably fear of George Shaw. Mm-hmm. And so that was why we decided to speak with him first, and we got him into grand jury and ultimately got him to tell the truth, which was that he was at Shaw's apartment that evening. And when he got there with Shaw, the babysitter was there, according to Shaw, and that Shaw took her into another room, and about a half an hour later, when Sanders looked in, she was lying on the bed deceased. So Sanders, helped him hide her remains, and that, kept that a secret for, I think it was 31 years.
31
years. And Sanders, wow. He had a criminal record too, but nothing like Shaw. Sanders, his entire life, especially after, he was always in trouble for DUIs and possession of small amount of drugs and things like that. He never committed violent crimes. And I actually, I'm not saying he's an angel, but I think he was probably, maybe there's a good chance he was self-medicating, for decades after that. Whereas Shaw, he had some other, episodes of violent crime. That was in his wheelhouse where it wasn't in Sanders.
So was this one of those, sadly typical cases of somebody who the Shaw was sexually abusing and then killed her to silence her? Do we know that?
That is my belief. Yeah,
but we didn't know in the end.
Because Sanders wasn't in the room, but they were using meth, and we know what meth does to people.
Well, yeah.
And from, when Barbara was found, she was, partially clothed. So I don't see the reason to disrobe somebody after the deceased. I mean, of course, we know that exists too, but I don't think that's the case. I think it was a sexual assault gone bad. Not that a sexual assault's a good thing either, but I think, it escalated.
No, exactly.
Yeah,
Yes,
I miss, but it escalated.
exactly. Yeah, which it so often does. Yeah. So,
And that's
yeah,
exactly
terrible,
what I think
terrible.
happened.
But now, again, you had I don't want to say a connection, but there was a connection. Did you not know her family from prior?
I didn't know them, but it was very strange. So back in 1984, in the summer of 1984, I was still living in Philly, but that summer, previous summers too, but specifically that summer, I worked at a day camp, a summer day camp, which was located in Bensalem.
The Cherokee Day Camp, right?
Yes, Cherokee Day Camp. Yeah, and I was what they called a counselor in training, a CIT, and I would assist counselors with used to call them bunks, and like I think we had the group of boys and the guy that I worked with, I think they were like 8 or 9 years old, and that was your group, and you did the activities and whatnot together, and there was a guy who wound up being a key witness in the case because his sister lived in an apartment over top of George Shaw. George Shaw lived in a triplex. And the guy worked at Cherokee as a maintenance guy. And anyway, back in late August, I remember because Cherokee Day Camp was 10 minutes away from where Barbara Rowan lived. And a lot of the people that attended camp, a lot of the kids that attended that camp were locals to the area. I was not. And there was rumor going around like, did you hear a young girl, was murdered? And, that sort of thing didn't happen a lot in Bensalem at the time. And it was late August, and I had forgotten about it, but, years later, I'm reading over reports, and the two original detectives went to Cherokee Day Camp to speak to this individual who had seen Barbara at Shaw's apartment on the day she disappeared. And I was reading it, and I'm like, I remembered the guy's name, and then it kind of like the light bulb went off, and I said, I remember the day the cops came to day camp, because we were being, everyone was being typical kids, oh, the cops are here, someone's getting busted, and stuff like that. And then I remember one of the senior staff kind of like tore into us and said, hey, knock it off. They're here to talk to so-and-so about that girl that was killed. And I said, then it all came together. I said, this is that case I heard about, back in 1980. It never clicked until then. But yeah, that was kind of eerie. It was a little weird.
Yeah, it was wild. Back to like our previous conversation that we've had in the past, where sometimes things are meant to be,
Yeah.
Things just kind of happen, and it's strange that you were there, then you ended up catching that case, which was a closed case, right? That you were
it was just sitting.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Wild, wild story.
Yeah, who knows? If I hadn't been laid up in that cast and my sergeant hadn't said something about it, I mean, it might still be sitting there. And that's not a shot at anybody else. I'm just saying it may have still been sitting.
Well, no, it happens. It happens. And people don't realize, too, when police officers or police departments, detectives close cases, it's not because they want to. It's because they have, 20, 30, 50, 100 other cases they have to get to.
Sure.
And after a while, it's exhausted. It's just exhausted. Where are we going to go from there?
I mean, and time had gone by. I was a fresh set of eyes, and I had the luxury of saying, well, maybe technology can help, and it did help. When that tape I talked about, the FBI was able to say that the tape found with Barbara's body was an exact duplicate in filament fibers and construction as the tape that was found in his apartment, and he had a connection to the factory where it was made and things like that. So I mean, that was strong evidence, strong physical evidence. But it was a rough case. And, I mean, from the time it was reopened till the time we got a conviction was 15 years.
15 years.
Yeah, 2002 to 2017. So
how old at this stage of the game Well, it wasn't that long, so her family, everybody was still around to
They were, it's interesting you
see
brought
the
that up.
conviction.
She was an only child. That was their only child, Mr. and Mrs. Rowan. And I had never reached out to them when I reopened the case. And that was for two reasons. One was because I said, well, if there's a question that comes up that I need answering, I will call them or visit them. But I honestly, I wasn't full of confidence that we were going to solve it. And I thought, well, I don't want to reopen an old wound and give them false hope.
Of course.
And, sometimes was that a good decision? Was it not? There's people on both. People say, oh, you should have told them right away. And other people say, no, I get why you did it. That was the decision I made. But after we ultimately, in late September 2015, when we arrested Shaw in Florida and Sanders was already in custody, it was like 10 o'clock at night. And we said, we really need to call the Rowan family because this is going to, the media is going to, the news is going to put this out. And I didn't think it was right that they got blindsided by it.
Oh, no. Yeah.
Right. So it's like 10 o'clock at night. And Mike and I called the Rowan family. And Mike actually, made the call, but I was there. And Mrs. Rowan answered the phone and he verified, are you Mrs. Rowan? She said yes. And he said who he was. And there was a couple seconds of a pause. And she said, are you calling me about my daughter?
Yeah.
And
it must have hit you hard.
Yeah, it did. And he said, yes, I am. And at the time, it had been 31 years. And she said, I haven't heard, from the police in decades. And he said, I just want to let you know that we just made an arrest in the death of your daughter. That was pretty powerful.
Absolutely. I can imagine.
And, she said, I've been waiting a long time for this call. And Barbara's father was still alive. And so we said, listen, we're out of state. We're flying home in the morning. We got a press conference. And after that, we would like to come see you. So we did. We had the press conference. And then Mike and I, along with Jennifer, the prosecutor, and then we also brought somebody with us from what we call here in Bucks County, NOVA, the Network of Victim Assistance.
Mm-hmm.
And the four of us went to the Rowan residence and we met with them. And they also had some other family there. Barbara had two cousins and an aunt and an uncle that were close with her, and they were all there. So we just laid it out for them all. And we said, this is what, this is what's been going on and this is where we're at. And they were very, very appreciative.
And how old was this Shaw character when you picked him up?
He was about 10 years older than me. So he was probably about 55 when we arrested him.
Okay. And hopefully he'll be spending the rest of his life in jail.
I think that's a safe bet. He was not convicted of first-degree murder, which in Pennsylvania, is life without the possibility of parole. It was a very tough case to prosecute, due to the lack of evidence and things like that. But he was convicted of third-degree murder, which now in PA, if you're convicted of third degree, it would be 20 to 40 years. But in 84, it was 10 to 20, and we had to charge as the statute was in 84. But we also we got him convicted on attempted sexual assault. We couldn't prove the rape. Mm-hmm. Altogether, he got about 28 and a half years.
All right.
So, if he lives well into his 80s, he might see, if he does that, he could see daylight again. But, we did the best we could.
Well, you did a hell of a job. You did good. So,
thank you. Yeah,
on this note, we'll take a break for a second. All right. Okay. So we've come to the end of this story. Unless you have something important that you want to add.
No, I just, the only thing I can say about that case is, the reason we solved that case, we weren't better than anybody else that worked on it. I mean, we actually had the foundation they laid for us.
Sure.
But you just got to be stubborn. We refuse to give up.
That's it. You got to be like a pit bull, man. You lock your jaw and you don't let go.
And you got
So,
to choose your team wisely. And with Mike and Jennifer, I had a great team.
cool. Yep. All right. We're going to be back in 1 second, everybody. Hey, how you doing? Another nobody here, Travis Myers. This one's going out in particular to all my drinking friends out there, because I got a new favorite thing, and it's called Shanky's Whip, and it is magical. It's Irish whiskey mixed with a little caramel, a little cream, a little vanilla, and it's heavenly. What more can I say? I suggest you pick up a bottle. You can have it as a shot with a cold beer, like I like. On the rocks, it's great. Mix it with a little cola. I promise you, you're going to love this stuff. Next time you raise a glass, think of me, another nobody, Travis Myers. Hey, do the right thing. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any more of my nonsense. All the best, my friends.
Buy our books!
Hey, everybody, how you doing? We are back with my friend, Chris McMullin here. And Chris, you know what I wanted to ask you? I mean, that was a heartbreaking case, but it obviously did have, well, there are never any happy endings in this shit that we do. That's just the way it is, you know? But was this, what had happened, you had the book. Was it the book that led you to the podcast, that led you to your new fancy television show, Philly Homicide?
No, actually, it was. I think the podcast I did the podcast before the book was published, but yeah, I had done a podcast about one of the doe cases I was involved with, and not long after I did that podcast, I received an email at work from my friend Molly, who is now my producer as well. Well, I didn't know her at all then, but we're friends, and she's my producer, obviously, and she told me she was a television producer, said she had heard me on a podcast. She said, I like the way you tell a story. What do you think about trying to develop a true crime show based out of the Philadelphia area? And at the time, I was on the verge of retirement, and I said, all right, you got my attention.
Yeah.
So we wound up speaking that night, actually. I responded back to her and gave her my cell number. She called me, and we spoke for a while. And we hit it off, and we are very good friends now. And yeah, Philly Homicide, we just finished season 1.
That's right. And it's a pretty good show, so I enjoy it. Well, I like it. The production value is there. You, of course, as a host, you're incomparable, right? You're a
I
great.
hope so.
You're a great host. You got that charming smile that you're shining right now. But what was I saying? I do like these, because we're bombarded with all this true crime shit now, right? But what I do like is when you actually get to interview the detectives that run the case, which is what you do with your show. You meet the real detectives. You hear the story, more or less from the horse's mouth. So what was the case now? You said there was a Jane Doe that brought you to the podcast?
A couple of the other cold cases that I worked on.
And what was
before
the podcast too? I'm sorry.
I think the podcast was Best Case, Worst Case.
All right.
I was, I know I was on that twice. One time we talked about the wrong case, and the other one was the Lisa Todd case, which was Lisa Todd.
In the book.
Yes. And the way that story goes is after I had, started opening the Rowan case, I, in true Chris fashion, got bitten by the bug. And I was like, well, what other cold cases do we have? Because I want them all.
Yes.
And I found this other case. I remember looking through this binder. It said Jane Doe on the binder. And when I opened it up, there was a photograph of a human skull.
Mm-hmm.
And then so that kind of grabbed me. And then I look, and there's more photos, and there's photos of this entire human skeleton. And then I actually see the scene where the skeleton was found, and it was in this pump house in an abandoned distillery. And I'm like, this is crazy. So they just found the skeleton, and they don't know who she is. So again, I said, I'm looking at the pictures. The girl had designer jeans. She had several articles of clothing with her, like some additional ones that were looked like they were dumped where she was found. she had some rings on her finger, and she was pregnant.
Yes.
There was actually fetal bones discovered. And she was found in January of 1988 in an old distillery called the Publicker Distillery, right off the Delaware River.
Mhm.
And, there was not a whole lot on it. She was found, and there was no missing persons reports. Then I remembered years prior, Frank Friel, our director of public safety, which was the equivalent of the chief of police, he had commissioned a sculpture made over her skull by Frank Bender, who was a forensic artist. And Frank Bender was very well known for having solved a lot of cases like that. He had a really intuitive insight as to what, somebody looked like in life. And then I remembered, Frank telling me about that years prior. And I just kept saying to myself, well, how can somebody not be missing this girl?
Yes.
Like, somebody's got to be missing her. And, all right, if whoever put her there, may very well have been the father of the child. I get that. We all get that.
Well, as we all know, number one cause of death for pregnant women is homicide.
Yeah. And she was young. She was estimated at being like 17 to 22, I think. So I'm like, okay, she's a teenage parent. Well, I can relate to that. I was there. And, I'm thinking, did the father in this relationship not want to be a father? She was hidden. She was put there so that nobody would find her. And I don't believe that that's where she was killed. I just believe that that's where she was laid to be hidden and rest. But, so, Frank Bender's sculpture had been out there in the media for a long time, but long story short, nobody ever identified her. And then, right away I'm thinking, well, we had a girl that went missing in 1983 named Tracy Bird. And rumor had it Tracy ran away because she was pregnant. I bet you that's Tracy Bird. And I started working on that case, and I was able to get grant money from the president's DNA initiative. And I sent the remains down to the Center for Human Identification in North Texas. And I was able to get a DNA profile and upload Jane Doe into the CODIS system, which, the computerized DNA indexing system. So that in the event, whether it be my police department or a police department on the other side of the country has a relative who has a missing, or has a person that has a missing relative, and they submit DNA, it'll compare them to see if they match up. So that was a big step for me. I was happy we were able to do that. And then I tracked down Tracy's relatives, and I got all their DNA samples. And when I had the comparisons done, I was very confident I was going to get a match, and it didn't match. So I was pretty let down over that. But so ultimately, fast forward, I had put the case out there on every. One of the things that, I wanted to do was use the power of the media and the internet. That didn't exist back in the 80s either. But there's a lot of websites out there for, cold cases and, amateur investigators and things like that. And I figured I'm putting it out there. Like, I want this case out there, because maybe somebody somewhere knows something.
And quite often these armchair detectives, as much as they can get in the way, they also find some amazing leads and facts.
Yeah, I have a couple times where I was helped by people that were not law enforcement, but they were very helpful to me. So eventually, investigative genetic genealogy came on scene, which is, we also referred to as DNA genealogy. And I want to try that. Of course, that's very cost prohibitive, excuse me. But eventually I was able to get it done. And a woman named Yolanda McClary was a genealogist, and she helped me figure it out. It took, once we had the profile uploaded into the public databases of, it was GEDmatch, and I think the other one's Family Tree DNA. It was about 4 days of her building a family tree with Jane Doe's profile, and I could not keep up with her. Yeah. Well, I mean, it was fun, don't get me wrong, but she was like, okay, try this lead. because you never know which way you're going to go. We had
It's amazing how quickly it moves too.
Yes, it does. And then, we came up with I believe it was a first cousin match for a young woman that lived in Pennsylvania up in the Pocono Mountains area. So, with everything like this, I'd like to like go to the door personally, but when there's distance involved, I can't, and some people have said, well, you shouldn't call them because what if the person you called is the one that, put them there? And yeah, that I get that. That's a risk. Anyway, I called this young woman and I told her what was going on, who I was, and she was very nice and very cooperative. She said, listen, I would love to help you. She said, I was adopted. She said, and I don't know anything about my biological family. And so that was tough. That was, because I would think I got a first cousin relative here. But anyway, on day 4, I think it was January of 21. Yolanda sent me a text message, says, check your email. I check my email when I get there, and she said, she gave me 2 names of people that lived in Philadelphia. Joseph Todd and Linda Todd. She said, your Jane Doe is their sister. I said, wow.
It's amazing. It's amazing stuff. It really is.
Yeah. And, over the years, because that case had been in the Philadelphia area media so much, I was starting to believe that she was not from around here. Mm-hmm. Where she was found was right off I-95. There was an old truck stop there. I was starting to think maybe she's from the West Coast. Maybe she's from another part of the country. Yeah, and I was exploring those theories greatly. Spent a lot of time spinning my wheels doing that. But so I tried to reach the Todds. I couldn't find a phone number, but they didn't live far away. So I wound up reaching Joseph Todd's younger daughter. She was about a young woman, 18, 19 at the time, and I told her who I was. I said, this is going to be a weird phone call. I apologize. Told her who I was, what I was doing, and what was going on. And I said, with all of that, I said, did your dad ever have a sister that disappeared? And she says, yeah, he did. He had a sister that vanished in 1985. Mm-hmm. I said, what was her name? And she said, Lisa Todd. So at the time, I had been working on that case for 19 years. And I said, I need to speak with your dad. She said, he's going to be here any minute. I'll have him call you. A few minutes later, Mr. Todd calls me. Clearly, he's emotional. And I said, you found my sister? I said, yes, I believe I did. I said, I had an address. I said, do you still live at this address? He said, yeah. I said, how about I just come down and see you? And myself and a couple other detectives went down to see him. And I brought photographs of the clothing and the jewelry that were found with her and went down to see him. And he remembered the clothing. He remembered the jewelry. And he told me, he said, I said, where did you guys live at when your sister disappeared? He said, right here in this neighborhood. It was only 15 minutes from where she was found.
What if I can ask now? Was there never a missing persons report made?
Oh no, there was.
There was. And it was it just buried in the files, or was it something that, because back then there were no computers.
Well, there was but there was NCIC. So no, this is a sore spot. This really pisses me off. So when she disappeared in October of 85, she was 17 years old. Therefore, she was a juvenile. Mom and dad report her missing to Philadelphia police. Her birthday was sometime, I believe it was late December. It was her 18th birthday. And apparently she was taken out of the system after she turned 18.
Yeah.
Now, how in the hell somebody's age matters whether or not they're missing or not? Yeah. And I was never really able to get a straight answer on it, despite trying. Yeah. And the reason I know that was because the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children they were able to do what's called an offline NCIC search for me, because now that I had Lisa's name and date of birth, they had those search terms, and they found that she had indeed been reported missing in October, and a few months later she was taken out of the system, and it just blew my mind.
Yes.
Because the way I, I know, I've worked long-term missing persons cases, and every so often you'd go into the report and you would see an entry by our dispatcher on such and such date and time that they verified that this person was still in missing status, and they kept the NCIC missing persons report active.
Sure.
But this kid, now, if that hadn't been purged, it even said she was pregnant. So there was probably a really good chance that back in '88, they might have pieced it together, because they're, hey, young girl pregnant from Northeast Philly, 15 minutes away. That really pisses me off. But instead, she remained a Jane Doe for what, like another 36 years or something like that.
Tragic.
So yeah, I mean, she was identified. I have my theory of what happened to her. I'm not going to comment on it because other people are still looking into it. It when she went missing too, she had another child, a little boy that was about 2 years old, and I was able to meet with him, and he's a really good guy, and he was so appreciative. He said, "Listen, I realize that, now I know that my mother is deceased," and he said, "But, now I know." He said, "I always struggled with, did my mom just abandon me?"
Right.
He never knew. He grew up, mom's gone. So, to me, that's why you work on cold cases, because, I don't know, have you ever heard the starfish story? I talk about that in my book.
Yes. Do you want to mention it now?
Pardon me?
You want to mention it now or no?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the starfish story is when I heard that a long time ago, it had a very, impactful, it hit me really hard. But the starfish story is a story about a beach after a storm, and there's thousands of starfish washed up on the shore. And this was written by a guy named Lauren Isley. And the starfish are on the beach, and there's this young boy running around, and he's picking up the starfish and he's throwing them back into the water as quickly as he can. And he comes across this elderly man who thinks that he's wise in his years and things like that. And he says, "Young man, what are you doing?" And he says, "Well, if I don't throw the starfish back in the ocean, they'll die." And the man says to him, he says, "Take a look at the beach." He says, "There's thousands of them. How can you possibly make a difference?" And he picks up another one, tosses it, and he says, "Well, I made a difference to that one." And I just think that is such a good parable, story that teaches a lesson. I just, a lot of work goes into cold cases, but when you get some positive results, you make such a difference to those that were left behind.
And it's something that I tell young police officers all the time, we all join because we want to do the right thing, right? For the most part, we want to be good guys. We want to help people. But the reality of it is, we're not going to save the world.
Can't save the world.
You can't save Philadelphia. I certainly could not save the Bronx, but you can absolutely make a difference in an individual's life.
Exactly.
Okay?
Yeah, and that's it. If you want to make a positive difference, that's it.
Absolutely. And there are cops, detectives, firemen, EMTs who step into harm's way every single day. And no, they don't change the city of New York or the city of Philadelphia or Bensalem, Pennsylvania, but you can make the difference in an individual's life. And
right.
I truly believe that.
They change it for the people that, they help successfully.
Yeah, and that is with all the beating that police departments take all the time. And just like right now, we're mad that this young lady was taken off of the missing persons list. Mistakes happen, but it is still an honorable and commendable job,
Yeah, I mean, it just, I mean, that was why, the difficulties I had with those cases with getting the money to do forensics and I came from a well-funded department, but at times it just wasn't there. And, I had to make, one time I made it, with Yolanda that helped me with this case. She was actually a TV producer. She had a show called The Jane Doe Murders. It's a really good show where she solves like 3 or 4 cases like that. She wanted to use Jane Doe. She said, I'll get this done for you and pay for everything if we can have the story. Unfortunately, they never did any more episodes. But that, I was, you can have the story. I want to solve the case, absolutely. So that was why I started my nonprofit organization, Cold Case Initiative, and even in my logo, you'll see starfish. That's the whole point of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And how's that going for you?
Pretty good. We've solved one case so far. We solved a John Doe that was found in the Delaware River back in 2003.
So what this is now for our listeners, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it is your foundation gives money all over the country to smaller departments that don't have the money to continue investigations or need help with DNA or whatever it might be. You help support smaller departments who don't have the resources to go after their Jane Does, or rather their cold cases.
That's exactly it. It's called Cold Case Initiative. It's a 501c3. It's a nonprofit organization, and our mission is simple. You can go on our website and see it, but we raise money to help offset the costs of forensic testings for agencies that don't have the money. And it could be for John and Jane Doe cases like we were just discussing. It could be for unsolved homicides, or it could even be for a, serial sex predator that is still actively committing crimes. We're working on a couple cases right now that are out in Arizona. I was happy the first case we solved was in Bucks County. But we will work on a case anywhere. Our biggest problem is raising money. It's not easy, but I'm confident that there's about 3 or 4 cases we're working on now, and I know that we're very close to solving one. So
good luck with that. Good luck with that, my friend.
Thank you.
Now, so you believe this is the one that, back to where we started, is what led you to the podcast, which got you discovered for this new television show of yours.
Yeah, so back to when Molly reached out to me after hearing that podcast. So we started talking, and we had different... Originally, we had thought about maybe we could do a show about cold cases, and hopefully maybe that'll come down the pike. But we came up with Philly Homicide. We had filmed what's called a sizzle reel, just showing the area and with me in it, and just showing the flavor. And we didn't reinvent the wheel, let's be honest. There's other shows like that, but
sure.
I was very adamant that I wanted it to be very on the level. I didn't want it to be over embellished or things like that. I think we did a good job of that. And
it is
ultimately,
good. The episodes, I haven't watched all of them, but I have watched several. And unfortunately, this is entertainment. That these terrible things become entertainment, but they are well done. They're well produced. And like I said before, you get to hear from the actual detectives, which I always like.
Yeah. And one thing I've noticed and I found, the friends and or family of the victims in this case, like it gives them a platform to talk about their loved ones.
Absolutely.
And I think from what I've seen, for those that are willing to do it and choose to do it, because obviously if somebody wants to do it, we respect that and we move on. But I think it's almost a cathartic process for them.
Sure.
To just sit there and talk about it. I mean, unfortunately, we can't change these terrible things that happened.
You and I both know all of these people because so many of us are the same. I never brought my work home with me. I never told my wife about my job. I just was not that guy,
Right.
You that Irish thing where you pack it all down as deep as you can, right?
Yeah. I know all about that.
I was on a podcast, I don't know, maybe 2 years ago now, where I told my 9/11 story. And like my sister and my brother and my wife, my brother who also was a police detective in the Bronx, he's like, you never told me this. Well, this was my story and it was mine. And I kind of kept it to myself. After telling that story, though, and getting it was a great relief to get it off my chest. And there was nothing heroic about it. I want the world to understand that. I spent 5 days at 9/11. I'd already retired like 8 months before, and I went down as a volunteer. But the shit you see just gets to you after a while, and I never told anybody anything about it. And when I did, it was a great relief. Now, for you, let me just jump back a little bit here too, because we're talking about you, not about me. All right. So for you now with this new Philly homicide show, it's about all kinds of cases all over the place, but you in particular, one of them has to do with you and your partner, correct?
There was 2 episodes that I was involved in. Yes, the one case you're talking about with my partner Dave Nieves, where he was assaulted, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I was involved in that case. I wasn't one of the leads, but I was involved with it. Yeah, and Dave wound up getting injured. Yeah.
Is that a story you want to share?
Sure.
Yeah.
That was the case of Dr. Soa. He was a local chiropractor, and he's a very nice man, very active, well known in the community. Ran the practice right out of his home. His wife helped him run it, and he had 2 sons that are teachers in local schools, and they coach baseball and things like that. Just all great family across the board. One day, one of his sons one of his sons was trying to call him and couldn't reach him, and called the other son because they were all close. They all spoke daily, and his one son, I think he only lived a couple doors away. He said, "I'll stop by and check on him." And when he went into his father's home, into the office area, which was on the first floor of the home, single home, found his father deceased, and he had been attacked. He was beaten to death. And it was a true whodunit. As time went on, the lead investigators in this did some great work. And they found some video footage from a business that was not that close to the store, but it had a camera that had an angle that was just right to show the doctor's residence. And they could see there was a white car that pulled into the parking lot, and then you see a person get out. But I mean, it was so far away, there was no distinguishing characteristics. And then I think it was 53 seconds later, the person exited the house. So the person was in and out quickly. And this was before, obviously, Dr. Stowe was found. And then the car takes off again and goes in a certain direction. But that was like striking gold when they found that, because then they started using other traffic cameras, and they were able to follow that car.
Yes.
And get a better look at it. They couldn't really see who was driving it, other than that the driver was wearing, I think it was a red or maroon sweatshirt, but it had a very distinctive seat cover on the passenger side. And ultimately they got the license plate, and found out that the one individual that lived in that home had actually been a patient of the doctor's. And he was a young guy. He was only in his early 20s. Joey O'Boyle was his name. And my friend and partner, his name is David Nieves. Dave and I, in fact, Dave's from the Bronx.
Oh, really?
Yes, born and raised. Yes. Yeah. He'd be a good guy for you to have on sometime. But
yeah, give my info. We'll get together.
I will. I was going to start telling his story, but I don't want to steal his thunder. So Dave is very active. He loves to coach basketball, and for years he's been coaching basketball teams, elementary school and whatnot. And he had actually coached this kid Joey when Joey was younger, so he knew him well, and he knew the family well. So it was decided that he should be the point man to make contact with them. And the police had obtained a search warrant for the vehicle and for the home. And we went to the house, and I was there, although you won't see me on that footage because I was actually outside the house. Mm-hmm. But several of them went into the house, and Dave was addressing them and telling them, and they brought Joey down because they wanted to speak with him. And if you've seen the episode, you know what I'm talking about. That's not a recreation. That's real body cam footage.
Yes.
Without provocation, Joey O'Boyle violently attacks Dave and hits him multiple times about the head and face. And other officers were able to finally separate the two of them. And I wound up taking Dave to the hospital that night. Myself and another guy named Carrie, we took Dave to the hospital. And Dave might deny it, but he was shaken up. Man, his bell was rung. I
Sure.
mean, you know, they were worried that he had a concussion. And, you know, it was pretty scary because obviously, you know, Joey O'Boyle has since been convicted, and you know we saw what he was capable of doing, and it seemed as though he was intent on maybe trying to do that again.
And
the
for
only
our
difference
listeners
was-
now, what was the motive in this attack?
So the motive, he apparently had terrible jaw pain,
Yes.
and I don't know if there was migraines involved too, and he does have mental illness. But he apparently went to see a chiropractor because he had a lot of pain in his jaw, and he was hoping that the chiropractor would be able to give him relief. And apparently he felt that after seeing the chiropractor, it got worse. And he had several times apparently had said to his parents that he wanted to file a lawsuit against Dr. Soa. But apparently the motive for the killing was that he was angry over not being able to fix his jaw pain and allegedly making it worse.
And so he just went off on the doctor and sadly killed him.
Yes, very senseless, very, very tragic, very sad.
Well, so often it is just so stupid in the end. You know?
Yeah, just
I just like so often, you know, I don't know why it seems so often we're always talking about women in particular who were attacked and murdered, sadly. And when it's a domestic thing, man, why can't you just leave? It's beyond me. It's beyond me how things get so out of hand so quickly. But they do. They do.
they do. Yeah, things can go from zero to bad real fast.
Yeah.
Um,
They really do.
but yeah, so that was episode 3 of Philly Homicide, and I just, you know, with Philly Homicide, I really wanted to show. I wanted to respect and honor both victims and their families, while at the same time, I wanted to show how much detectives put into cases.
Yes.
And, you know, how at times it becomes personal to them. I mean, if you watch that one episode, I don't know if you've seen it, from Philadelphia with the Center City rapist.
Yes.
Um,
Wait. Was it Center City? No, that wasn't the one. There was something Center City that I remember where a
The
woman
Center
was
City
killed.
Devil.
Yeah.
Okay,
saw
yeah.
that.
There was another one about a guy that the media had dubbed the Center City rapist, and even the one you're talking about, the Center City, all of them, the detectives in that, it was the same detectives. Like, you know, you can see them. Like they say, you know, like, listen, he one of the episodes, he says, listen, I had 2 daughters at the time around the same age. Nobody wanted this guy caught more than me.
Mhm.
You know, I just wanted to show that, you know, that these, you know, there are detectives out there that carry that burden, you know, that they really double
Absolutely.
down. And
Absolutely.
when they don't solve a case, how it bothers them too, that, you know,
Well, like
they're really,
you had mentioned in the beginning how, I can't remember which one of it, but how these cases, you know, haunt you, you know,
Yeah.
and we call them ghosts. We have ghosts. You know, these cases are victims that even quite often, if you solve the case, the victim is still a ghost for you. You know,
Right.
it never leaves, and it's you know, again, they never leave. It's in the back of your head for the rest of your life.
yeah. I mean, you know, I know the cemetery where Barbara Rowan has been relayed to rest.
Yes.
And there's been times I've been in the area and actually I've stopped and visited her grave.
Sure.
You know, I never knew her in life, but I feel like I know her.
You have an attachment. Absolutely.
Never.
Absolutely.
But yeah,
And-
I wanted to make a good show and just, you know, show how hard they work at times.
Well, I tell you what, Chris, it is a good show. I enjoy it very much. It's on the Oxygen Network. And what, correct? Is that right?
Oxygen, yes.
Yes, Oxygen. And what is it? What days is it? Does it come on?
Well, it originally, when it was in its first run, it was Saturday nights at 9 o'clock. But Now it's sporadic. And it's also now on the Peacock platform on demand.
Okay, yes. I watched them when it first came out. I don't know if it was Amazon or whatever it was, because I didn't have the Oxygen network, and I would have to find it, but I could find it on, again, I think it was Amazon. I'm not sure what it was I was watching.
Yeah, it's an Oxygen show, and obviously it would be on the Oxygen channel, but there's a lot of platforms. Hulu, you can get it. Peacock. I'm not, YouTube TV, I believe it was on.
People,
So
pay attention, watch Philly Homicide with our friend Chris McMullin, and pick up 3 Decades Cold. This is some really, again, all these words always sound good, it's really terrific stories, but they're not. They're just sad, god-awful stories. But if you're a true crime fan, this is true crime, and that's what you sign it up for, right?
I held nothing back in that. So, I mean, that goes back to when I was 7 years old. So it's like somewhat autobiographical. Any money I make off my book that I make goes towards my nonprofit too.
Very good. Oh, and that's it too. Yes. Let's mention that one more time before we say goodbye.
Cold Case Initiative. It's www.coldcaseinitiative.org.
Yes. And please, if anybody's feeling charitable, you want to put your money somewhere, put it there, because it's a good cause.
Thank
and
you.
With that, I'm going to say goodbye until next time. And I hope there is a next time, my friend. I'd like to have you back again sometime. So,
all right, buddy.
All the best, my friend. Take care.
You too. Take care.
There you have it. Chris McMullin, everybody. Good man. He's done a lot of good work, especially on those cold cases. Remember to check out his book, 3 Decades Cold. Also, check him out on his TV show, Philly Homicide. And please, now for me, do the right thing. Hit that likes button. Hit that subscribe button. And we'll see you next week, my friends. Listen up. This one's important. I'd like to try to encourage you, please, to give to the Stephen Siller Foundation, Tunnel to Towers, at T2T.org. That's letter T, number 2, letter T.org. Do good for those who've done good for you.